Okay, Shalom Yashala. What's going on? Abanawa Shabbat Shemayim Kodash Hayashamka Yahweh. Our Father which art in heaven, holy is your name, Yahweh. All right, this right here, we're going to be real short with it. We're not going to go into a long class. We have a lot of international things we're trying to take care of. I'm going to just do a, quick review. And this is going to be really about encouraging you to research and review. Because this is the 12th episode, the 12th first day that we've actually done It's About Time. And this is the first time that it's been done, not being a live video class. First time with a white screen. All right, so let's take just a few minutes real quick. Let's discuss DEPC. All right, this is the concept that you have to remember when you're dealing with time. Okay, when you're dealing with time, DEPC. Okay, so when we say the D stands for darkness begins the time count. When you're dealing with time, the count of the time begins when it's dark. We see this from Genesis chapter 1, when Yahweh said that the evening and the morning were the first day. So the same thing applies for when we begin our months. When the moon is dark, that's when we begin the count. We don't begin the count as the sun starts to rise and we see a little bit of light. That's not how we begin the count for the day. We don't begin the count for the moon when we see a little bit of light coming from the moon forming a crescent. That's not when we begin to count the moon, the day as beginning. So we want to understand that the counting of time begins with darkness. From Genesis chapter 1, this is evident. The second point we want to bring out is equity. Equity. Okay, equity means everything across the board is about the same. Okay, equity. Okay, equity. So we have evening, morning, darkness, we have light. So for the full moon, we have the black moon, which leads us into the perfect contrast. The perfect contrast means that you can take a waxing crescent and you can plug it into a waning gibbous and it would fit in perfectly. That's the perfect contrast. The perfect contrast means that when we have the darkness, Shalom Laka Yaikwab, when we have the darkness, we have the light. That's the perfect contrast. That's the perfect contrast. When we have the full moon, we have the white moon. And when we have the dark moon, the new moon, we have the black moon. They are perfectly opposite to each other. Okay, it's perfectly opposite to each other. The same thing when we have the Passover on the first month and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and we have the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths in the 7th month. And if you were to draw a picture, those two constellations, the 1st and the 7th month, would make a 180-degree line, meaning a straight line. So that's the perfect contrast that we're looking at when we have to consider time. And why do we talk about time so much? Because if you don't understand time, then, and you don't understand the concepts of time, then it's going to be hard for you to understand other things outside of Genesis chapter 1. And that's why the very first thing that we're introduced to in the whole Bible, in the whole Torah, is an adjective, which is the word in. In. So we're introduced to the concept of the God of the universe, Yahweh, with one word, in, which is a automatic relationship to something being out. And it talks about place. That's why people say, you know, you're not going to be in there forever. Or look, man, either you in or you out. You either for me or against me. You either in this truth or you out the truth. You see? The word has so many different meanings to it. That's the first word that we see in Genesis is in. So we have to understand that the Most High is dealing with not only time, but he's dealing with place. Everything in the whole Bible is about time and place. Wrong time, right place, wrong place. That's what the whole Bible is about. And when you bring time and place together, generally, you're going to get actions. Right actions or the wrong actions. You see? So that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about time. Once you understand that the whole Bible is based on contrast, is based on equity. And you know, we've covered these scriptures before. All right, we went into Ecclesiasticus, I believe it was chapter 42, verse 24 in the Apocrypha. And it tells you all things are double one against another. And he has made nothing imperfect. And that's where we get the perfect contrast, because everything is perfect. He made nothing imperfect. So everything has a counterbalance against it. All right. You got the deepest, darkest nations, all right, of people. Okay. Dark. Whether you're talking about the Andaman over in India, off the island over there. All right. Or whether you're talking about dark Hindus in Sri Lanka, or whether you're talking about dark tribes in Africa, and contrasted against that, who do you have? You have the people that got blonde hair, blue eyes, and very low melanin in their skin. So that's a contrast that we see that the Most High made in nature. Right? You got weeds that grow on the land, and then you got seaweeds. You got animals on the water that go into the land. You have animals on the land that go into the water. So the Most High said that everything was double against another. So that's the perfect contrast, up and down, left and right. Okay. But, you know, by the same token, The Most High made everything equitable and balanced. When you look in Ecclesiasticus chapter 33, verse 14 and 15. Good is set against evil, and life against death. So is the godly against the sinner, and the sinner against the godly. So look upon the works of the Most High, and they are two and two, one against another. So the Most High said again, 2 and 2. But he has that equity, good against evil, life against death. Okay. So the godly, meaning those that are walking in righteousness with the Most High, against those that are not walking in righteousness against the Most High. Meaning what? Meaning that the Most High put these two against each other. Those that keep commandments are against those that's not keeping the commandments. This is what the Bible said. Those that are following Yahweh, the God of Israel, are against those that's following Allah, following Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, all right, following Ganesh. The Most High Yahweh put those things opposite to each other. So is our concept of time. Now, the first concept that we went into, which is the D, represents the darkness. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the earth. So we see something being in the beginning, which is actually in the head of wisdom. And darkness was upon the face of the earth, meaning what? That everything was dark. So we see that the time that we measure begins in the darkness, not with a crescent, not with a little bit of sunrise, begins in the darkness. And God saw the light, and it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So the light and the darkness were divided after he said, let there be light, and there was light. See, the darkness was created first. And after the darkness was created, that's when we had the light. Yes, the darkness was created. The darkness didn't just appear out of nowhere on its own. All right. When we look in the book of Isaiah, if you look in the book of Isaiah, chapter 45, verse 7, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So Yahweh says, I make the light in the darkness. And Yahweh says, I make peace and I create evil. So God, Yahweh, is in charge of everything. But what we're dealing with is to show you that when we go back into Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, he says, let there be light. And in verse 2, he says that darkness was upon the face of the deep. So the darkness was created first with time. And when we keep going down and we see in verse 5, it says, and the evening and the morning were the first day. Meaning what? That the day begins with the evening. The day begins with the darkness. As you know, as we've learned from the Torah, as we've learned from other parts of the Bible, we have 3 phases of evening. 3 phases of evening. So the Most High made the darkness, he made the light. And then that light started to fade. Once that light started to fade, it had to go through different steps. One of the first steps that it went through was Tazalal, which means it starts to become a shadow. to Zalal, it starts to become a shadow. All right, the next phase that is going to go into is going to be Nashap. Okay, Nashap means that now we start to get dusk, we start to get a little bit of light, lights get decreased. And after the Nashap, we go into the last phase of the evening, which is going to be Ilta or Alta, when the darkness covers everything. And once you understand these concepts of time, now when you read other books, other histories, you can say, well, that contradicts Genesis, so I'm not going to follow that because it contradicts Genesis. It contradicts what we read in other parts of the Bible. So what I'm doing for you right now is just kind of giving you words to focus on. Not a picture, not an image on the screen, not a whiteboard, but just words that are life, that are based on the word of Yahweh, that talk about the different aspects and phases of time as they pertain to us. As they pertain to us. So we have to understand these concepts of time. And I just want you to focus on what I'm saying. And I want you to go back and look at these old videos that I've done for the past 12 weeks, man. 12 weeks. Every Shabbat. Every first day, been doing these classes called It's About Time for 12 weeks. And every day for the past 6, 7, 8 months, I don't know, I've been coming to you and bringing you a different piece of the Torah to help you understand the Torah better so that you can reevaluate and recalibrate yourself, man, to know what's really important in this life. Because if you don't have the laws of Yahweh on your side, then you got death on your side. Those words that we got from Moses are words of life. And that's the word that we read inside of the Holy Scriptures. Those are the words that we read inside of our law. Okay? When you go into the book of Deuteronomy chapter 30, and you read verse 15, see, I have set before you this day life and good, death and evil, in that I command you this day to love Yahweh your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, that you may live and multiply. You see? So life and good. So the words that I'm giving to you based on the Torah are life and good. But you have to decide that these concepts that I'm teaching from the Bible, from the Torah, about time, you have to decide that you're going to take heed. You have to make that decision. You have to make that decision. Nobody can make it for you. Because if you don't have the concepts of time, down packed, what's going to happen? Your worship is going to be off. How you keep the holy days is going to be off. How you keep the feast days are going to be off. How you keep the Sabbath is going to be off. Some of y'all out there don't even keep the Sabbath. You don't care about the Sabbath. You got better things to do on a Sabbath day. Sabbath is a catch-up day for you. A day to do the things you weren't able to do throughout the because you were working. And Yahweh doesn't come first. But once you understand from the beginning, darkness is waiting for you. From the beginning, the Most High had the darkness there first. To know that after every sunny day, it all goes back to the darkness. And you're going to stay in that darkness until you decide to walk in his commandments and his laws. You're never going to be into the light. So all of the studying and all of the research and all of the teaching and all of the money and all of the things that you're doing, everything that you're doing, if you're living outside of the words of life, as we see in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 15, if you're living outside of that, then there's nothing but darkness and waiting for you. There's nothing else, only darkness and death. So that's why we have to understand that darkness, when we're dealing with time, is the first thing that we understand. Because through darkness and disobedience, death came into the world. And that's why the scripture says that Yahweh is the light. He is the light of the world. And that's why he said that the children of Israel are the children of light. And we have to walk in the light. We have to walk in the light. And once we do that, then we know that we have a reward waiting for us. That he's going to put a crown on our head. And we're going to inherit that eternal life. All right? Our thoughts, as we see from the first one, by Ra'ash Yath, which means in the female head, in the head. Ra'ash Yath is a feminization of the word for head. So in the head, in the beginning. So our thoughts have to be thoughts of wisdom, or we have to cast those thoughts down. All right? If they don't have wisdom, we have to cast those words down. All right? So now when we're dealing with this concept of darkness, darkness and time, remember, darkness and time, you have to remember that darkness begins time count. Darkness begins the time count. So once again, when your sun, when you're at the high time of the day and then afternoon comes on, that's when we start to get shade. Tizalal. That's when we start to get shade on the ground. Shadows. After that, we get the Nashap, which is the darkness, all right, starts to increase and the light decreases. Twilight, dusk and dawn. And then after that, the final stage is Tzalal. All right, the final stage is Al-Tar, which is the darkness that covers everything. And then after that, we go back up. We go from darkness, and then we go back to twilight. The sun the light starts to increase, and the darkness decreases. And that's when we go into Nashap mode. And after Nashap mode, that's when we go into full sunrise, Shakad. And that's when we go into noon. And that's when we go into the different shadows and the shade of the day, which is going to be Tzalal. Okay. So like I said, this is a short lesson, a short class we're going to do today. All right. That darkness, and then that equity, and then that perfect contrast that we read about in Ecclesiasticus in the Apocrypha. Chapter 42, verse 24. Okay. And then we have Ecclesiasticus chapter 33, verses 14 and 15. That give us the clear picture. And then when we talk about Tzalal, we have Nehemiah 13 and 19 that talks about that. Look in the Hebrew Bible. And when we go to Nashap, we see Job chapter 3, verse 9, Job chapter 7, verse 4, Job chapter 24, verse 15. And when we talk about Alta, we have Genesis chapter 15, verse 17. All right. So once we understand these concepts, now we can understand that there is no beginning of time with a light from the sun or a light from the moon, because Yahweh's doctrines are true and consistent. We don't begin Genesis chapter 1 with the evening being the darkness, being the beginning of the day. And then when we have an accumulation of days called a month, we don't now change the rules and say we're going to begin to count from the light instead of the darkness like we did days. We're going to count this a different way. No, it's the same formula. That's what we learn in the Torah. So when we deal with the Sabbath day is every 7 days. And we've been keeping it like that since we came out of Egypt. And our records never show any type of change. No one can ever claim that we changed the Sabbath days. And the Sabbath day, as well as every other day, does not begin with the sunrise. It begins when the sun is going down and it first gets dark. And it doesn't begin at midnight. It begins when the light falls from the sky. When the light falls from the sky, the moon starts to rule the night as she was created for. And then we enter into a new Yom, a new Yawam. Okay? And these are the concepts that we have to understand. It begins in Genesis. It doesn't begin with the book of Enoch. It doesn't begin with the book of Jasher or Yasher or Yashar. It doesn't begin with the Qumran or the Dead Sea Scrolls. It begins in Bereshit, Bara'asheth, chapter 1. You have to understand time from Genesis chapter 1 first. And once we understand time from Genesis chapter 1, we have to understand the contents of what's going on in Genesis chapter 1. The agriculture, the vegetation, all right, the fauna, the creatures from Genesis chapter 1. Primarily we're dealing with time though. But I remember when Yahweh made everything, he said it, and immediately those things came into existence. So you want to say what came first, the chicken or the egg? The chicken came first. So that riddle was over. So everything from creation the Most High made. But when he made it, he didn't say this is how we're going to do everything. Because after that, we see that everything went through its cycle. Everything went through its cycle of life. It reproduced. These things had to reproduce after they were created. And when they reproduced, they didn't just start out as mature living creatures. They had to go through a process. Okay. So now when you go into 2nd Ezra chapter 6, let me just read real quick. A couple of verses. Okay. Let's read verse 42. Upon the 3rd day thou didst command that the waters should be gathered in the 7th part of the earth. 6 parts hast thou dried up and kept them to the intent that of these some being planted of Elohim God and tilled might serve thee. For as soon as thy word went forth, the work was made. For immediately there was great and innumerable fruit and many and diverse pleasures for the taste, and flowers of unchangeable color, and odors of wonderful smell. And this was done the 3rd day. So when Yahweh said, let and created and be, all of these things, they came into existence immediately. Immediately. Okay? Immediately. So what's the point of that? The point is that everything from the beginning that he created began in a certain phase. But that phase that he created these things in does not necessarily, or does not, as we see, determine that the beginning of that phase is always going to be like that when he created it. Now we know he created darkness and light first. So now we have to follow that as we go along now. That's the first thing we see. The darkness was created. All right. And then the light was created. And once we understand that, now we have to understand how that applies to the days, the months, the holy days. For example, when we observe the first month, do you realize that whatever constellation it's in, you can't see that constellation because the sun and the moon are there blocking it. They're blocking it. You can't see that constellation. Sun is in front of it. And do you realize that on the middle of the month, that the moon is opposite to the place where it began of the sun, where it began that new phase, what you call a superior conjunction? That's one of the names for the full moon is the superior conjunction. Conjunction meaning they paired up, lined up. Superior meaning it's further away from the sun. All right, so now you got the superior conjunction, and the moon is fully white. And Yahweh got us keeping these days. The first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread is the 15th day of the first month. And then the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles weeks, the Feast of Tabernacles and the Feast of Booths is on the 15th day of the 7th month. So when the moon is in that position on both of these holy days, it's opposite, 180 degrees away from what? Away from the sun, away from where it started out. Now, if Yahweh, because he's balanced and because he's perfect in his contrast, as we read in Ecclesiasticus 42 and 24, if we have the middle of the phase being white and full, we cannot have that phase beginning with a little bit of light on the left or the right. We have to begin that phase in the darkness of the moon, which we call the new moon or the inferior conjunction. Inferior because it's a shorter distance between to the moon and the sun, and in conjunction because they all lined up again. Everything's lined up again. All right. So it's an inferior conjunction. So that's how it looks when it starts. If the Most High wanted us to begin the month with the crescent moon, which is when you have a little bit of light on the right side, he would have told us to observe the middle of the month when you have no light on the right side. I'm sorry, on left side, right side, and then the left side, which would be the waning crescent, the waning gibbous, Salaklia. The waning gibbous, which means the full moon is now losing light. And it's getting, the light is disappearing on the right-hand side. The light's disappearing on the right-hand side. That's what he would have done. All right, because you got light coming in on the right-hand side, and then you either have light disappearing on the right-hand side, or you'd have light disappearing on the left-hand side, which would be a total contrast. Okay, which would actually start to happen once you have a waxing gibbous, meaning that it's not in its full state yet. But you go maybe a couple of days before it gets in its full state. But if you count from the crescent moon, which is 2 days after the full moon, 2 days after the new moon, and if you look at the full moon 2 days after that, you're gonna have what? You're gonna have a waning gibbous, meaning that the light is decreasing. So the Most High is perfect in all his ways. So everything has to be balanced, brothers and sisters. So that's why I want you to remember that concept, DEPC. The D is for darkness begins time count. Always begin the time count of time begins with darkness with the Most High in the Bible. That's for the day, and that's for the month, as well as for, the month begins in the darkness because it's in front of that constellation. And the moon is in front of the sun. So that's what the D stands for. The E stands for equity. Everything is balanced out. Good and bad, everything can be 180 degrees, or pieces of the puzzles, fit together. And then the PC stands for perfect contrast. Perfect contrast, meaning you have opposites when you're dealing with time and the constellations, and you're dealing with phases of the moon, and you're dealing with the holy days. So, like I said, it's not going to be a long class. It's 40 minutes, The clock on the wall says that's all. Yahweh be with you in the name of Yahweh Shai, Hamashiach. Shalom Lakam.